everyone, I'm Bill Harrell and welcome to Health Talk. Our program is sponsored by Gastroenterology Associates. My guest tonight is Dr. Roger Orth. He's a board-certified gastroenterologist. He's been practicing in the Pensacola area for 37 years. He practices at the Sacred Heart office, also South Baldwin and Atmore. And he also does procedures over at the Endoscopy Center in Pensacola. Well, Dr. Orth, great, welcome back. Glad to have you with, I tell you.
Yeah, it's just like old times, Bill, because in fact, it's us old guys are here.
The gray hairs are showing.
They are showing, and I've been doing shows on this particular lab since the original Freds asked me to help out, and you were one of my first co-hosts, and now it's like what goes around comes around, and that's probably, tonight it comes around because the subject of my talk has distracted my normal interviewer to be not here tonight.
Well, I wanted to make sure everybody knows about your medical training because people might not know what it takes to become a gastroenterologist. Tell us a little bit about your training.
Well, first off, you have to decide you want to go to school. And I actually chose medicine and subspecialty medicine because after a while of school, I had realized that the people who get to stay in school the longest are actually doctors, especially people who just stick it out. And so I went to school to be actually in solid state physics, but I found out you could stay in school a lot longer being a doctor. So I didn't get my first real job till I moved here, and I was 32.
So you went to medical school at Tulane, and then you get internal medicine, and that was at University of California.
Yeah, it was beautiful San Diego. I was right there at the cusp too, because it was right when the science and medicine was exploding.
And then finally, the fellowship in gastroenterology was at the University of Texas. And
well, you got to get that straight. The University of Texas has a football team. Southwestern University, Dallas, is a preeminent research medical school, and that's in Dallas.
Okay.
And that's Parkland and people who get all of that. It was a wonderful series, and I did spend a little bit of time at the National Institute of Health, the home of Tony Fauci.
Right, and last time you were on Health Talk was back in March, and we were just starting to, hear about this COVID-19. And one of the things that everybody talked about was how are we going to deal with this and where is a vaccine going to come from? And I think tonight we're going to talk about vaccines, and our topic is from Louis Pasteur to mRNA, why I took the vaccine. So we're going to talk about why you stepped up and took the shot. But why don't you start us off with some background on vaccinations and all of that.
Well, I'm going to start off in saying that our last show, I was focused on why we didn't have personal protective gear and what had happened with the World Trade Organization and what happened with us losing out our pharmaceutical industry, our industrial medical industry, because we were of short supply. And that was in March of course, last year was the beginning of the beginning. And I did talk about some of those tragedies, and those old shows are on our website, by the way, at the Endoscopy Center. And then I went on to have what I would call a really long year. And I think all of us have had a really long year. And so as we get towards it's at the beginning of the end or actually the end of the beginning. We are at the end of the beginning, as Winston Churchill would say, and there's lots of things to come. But I think it's important for us to pull together for a change. And there's been enough issues going on that we as a country have needs to pull together. And the fact that I'm privileged to have gotten a vaccine, I want to mention that tonight. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why I took that vaccine and why it's safe. It's certainly safer than going the other route. And to do that, I need to talk a little bit about where the vaccines come from. But I've been really heightened this year because we've had, being a practicing doctor, being old enough that I was supposed to retire, except I don't really play golf. So we were shut down for periods of time, but we still had to take care of patients, and have dealt with lots of patients. And people get sick from other things too, lots of other things. But I was really heightened early on because one of my patients called attention to me for the Wuhan back in December of last year, right when it was happening. And that's because I'd been working with him because he married this lovely lady from Wuhan. And so I was setting things up for him and actually called him once in Wuhan 2 years ago, and then was setting him up for his follow-up. And lo and behold, he was then countering back, "I'll be there, doc. And by the way, can you get any extra gloves for our doctors here in Wuhan? Because they've used them all up, and there's no personal protective gowns because they'd used them up." And subsequently, we found out we couldn't get them. But it showed me that this is a small world. And it's a small world because in globalism, now you can get any disease from lots of places. This is not just something you read about. And we have gotten some diseases here that are just amazing. And we're living through one of them. So I thought I would talk a little bit about how you get around that. And the history of vaccines is interesting. So I'm going to take a few minutes to tell you a little bit of history. You probably haven't heard this since high school or something, but Edward Jenner in 1796 was a good observer. He's a doctor, but he watched what people do. This is what doctors do. They look for patterns. And he saw that handmaids, milkmaids, they could get a resistance to the smallpox, which was a terrible disease that would kill up to 40, 60% of people. And he ultimately realized that they got little sores in their hands and they got little cowpox. And that was biosimilar enough that it could make an immunization as a self-immunization. Well, experimentation was a little different back then, so he had a little 8-year-old named James Phillips, and he inoculated him with some of that cowpox. And then a couple months later, he gave him a very small dose of smallpox, which is something that doesn't have normal permit. And he went around the IRB system like the warp speed did too also. But in any event, it turned out the kid didn't get sick. And within a couple of years, thousands of people had it. And then they had to figure out how to get rid of it because smallpox had devastated the New World. There was no smallpox before the discoverers, so-called, came and killed all the Indians by bringing smallpox and a lot of other things. So they decided, the Spanish decided they needed to get the cowpox here, but they didn't have 70 degree below containers. So, of course, what you do is you put them in orphan children while in Spain, and you have 20 some of them, and every 8 or 10 days you inoculate another 2 of them, and then you have to get the little pustule, and every 8 or 10 days they do another one. And so they got 24 kids come over here. They were carrying cowpox live because there was no way to freeze dry it back then. And they inoculated more than 100,000 people with it. And that started the vaccination program for smallpox in the United States, in the New World. So I thought that vaccine chain and the transport of vaccines was interesting and how that started. And then we also had this problem where people not only didn't believe in germs, they didn't know about germs. So the original germ people, which is something that's become very important, because not only am I talking about actual problems to do with vaccine, but the basics. And one of them is hand washing. So there's this fellow named Ignaz Semmelweis. And in 1847, he's a young doctor and he moves to Vienna. And in Vienna, he's going to deliver babies. And soon he becomes apparent that he wonders, there's 2 services. There's one for the doctors and the med students, and the other is for the midwives. And he finds out that the locals want to go to the midwives. He couldn't figure out why they wanted to go to the midwives. But then he watched them, and it turns out that the doctors had a much worse living rate, their patients, the babies, than the other. So he went to go watch them, and he realized there was something peculiar that they might transmit on their hands, like they didn't wash their hands or something. But nobody knew that was important. But then at the same time, it was anatomic pathology was important. And with anatomic pathology, one of the pathologists had died of something that looked just like puerperal sepsis. He put it together that there were particles, that there were living organisms, and he insisted that they wash their hands. He even suggested chlorine, and they'd use that. It caused a big stir, and he lost his job. And so ended up, he was gone. But he didn't spread that around. Nobody listened to it. And the Vienna people made him leave, and he went back to a rural Austrian-Hungarian Empire.
Dr. Orth, there are a lot of people that have been hearing about this program, and we've actually got one person that has called in. So is it all right if we take this call real quick? And
Okay.
Hi, welcome to Health Talk. Do you have a question for Dr. Orth?
Yes, I do. I have a question about the vaccine. I'm allergic to eggs, and I've had problems with flu shots. Do you think it'd be okay to get the COVID-19 vaccine, or would there be a risk of a severe reaction if I receive the vaccine?
No.
I'm going to hang up and listen.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
I'm going to jump to that right off since you've asked it. The biochemistry, and really that's part of the main part of the second half of what I'm going to be talking about, so I'll be coming back to that again. But the biochemistry of how you make this vaccine is amazing. And it doesn't have anything to do with eggs. It doesn't have anything to do with those allergens. And it's actually fairly low toxicity. So I will say that the answer is you should take the vaccine. I will also mention, since I was just getting around to rabies vaccines,
Okay.
because Louis Pasteur made the first vaccine for humans, and he started out with using rabbits and had to use spinal cord from rabbits, and he inoculated first dogs and ultimately a child, and ultimately it just took off because rabies was universally toxic. You bring up the egg issue because it wasn't long after that they could not do it in rabbits anymore. They had switched over to eggs. And so they could grow the rabies in an egg and make it that way. However, that jumps ahead of the story just a bit because I'd still want to talk about Louis. Because Louis Pasteur was the original issue for proving that there were germs. He was the original issue. He founded the field of immunology. Not yet. Turn
Okay.
that off.
We're going to hold off on that just a second.
Yeah,
There we go.
until I get to that. So he started out with the immunizations, and people didn't believe it, that there was bacteria that could cause a disease or that there's a virus that causes a disease, and he had to fight with the doctors because he was not an MD. So he ended up having to convince them. Ultimately, he got on the academy in Paris, but he spent a lot of time being contested, and as this process evolved, he took a lot of heat, like some people ahead of their curve, and he was ahead of their curve. And ultimately, he introduced a host of things, including that you should wash your hands also, and that there should be antiseptics, and that the diseases could be airborne. He's the one who showed first that diseases could be silent, that the human could carry a disease and not show it. That those all four of those things have been critical in why our response has been inadequate for this process so far. We have healthy people carrying it around and sharing it because healthy people think they're healthy. We have to be conscious of that. So I was going to actually cut over to mention some of the issues that they had.
Why don't we take a break now, and then when we come back, we'll hit those issues. We're going to take a short break now. We'll be right back with Health Talk.
Our weight, it's with us every day. It's not that we don't try to say goodbye to our excess weight. We do. We exercise, we eat healthier, we try to stay active. But for many of us, it's simply not enough. Well, there's finally a solution. Introducing Orbera, a non-surgical procedure to achieve meaningful long-term weight loss. Orbera is a new non-surgical weight loss procedure that can help you gain the edge and lose the weight. People lost more than 3 times the weight with Orbera than diet and exercise alone. Orbera gives you that edge you need to lose the weight and power a more confident, healthier lifestyle. Orbera is not for those who are pregnant or breastfeeding, have autoimmune or organ disease. Heartburn, stomach discomfort, abdominal pain, and bowel obstruction are rare. Other adverse events include nausea and vomiting. Find out more and see if Orbera is right for you.
Has anyone ever said, "You're the picture of health"? You look healthy, you feel fine, but that may not be the full picture. Colorectal cancer is the second leading cancer killer of men and women over 50. It doesn't always cause symptoms, but it can be prevented. Screening can find precancerous polyps, so they can be removed before they turn into cancer. Get screened. Make sure you are the picture of health.
Welcome back to our program, Health Talk. We're talking with Dr. Roger Orth. He's been talking a little bit about the history of vaccinations, but we do have a caller, and let's go to that real quick. Welcome to Health Talk. Do you have a question for Dr. Orth? You there? Okay, must have lost him. All right, let's pick up where you were, and we were talking about Louis Pasteur and the importance of I guess his contributions.
Well, at the initial part of it, that people wouldn't accept this kind of new thought. But ultimately, obviously, he became very famous, and then every bottle of milk everywhere and pasteurization. But there was a lot of resistance. And I think there's always an undercurrent of resistance when something's new that's actually important. And so in the process of this, we had resistance of people who thought that vaccination was a bad idea, that it was against the human body, that it was not godlike, that God didn't need those helpers, that there was whatever thing there's, and you can look it up on any of a host of news or misinformation or that's available out there. But vaccines have been very important in keeping people going and keeping this world allowed to get as crowded as it's become. There's a lot of people. But it's important to realize the resistance has been not unique to the most recent time frame. This goes way back. So let's just look at some of Louis' slides. Could I have the slide? So here's old time Louis Pasteur just a picture. They were called anti-vivisectionists because Louis worked with some animals too. Let's go to the next slide. And again, you can read this. It talks about how evil it is to have a vaccination program, etc. Let's go to the next one. And that compulsory vaccination was particularly bad, and you should make people have to get a vaccine.
All right, so that right there, could be something that's going to be currently, a topic.
This next one is very current.
All right.
Go to that. This is 1902. Let's read these words. An association of half-mad, misguided people who write and toil and dream of a time to come when it will be lawful to retain in pure body Mother Nature gave since greeting to a suspect. Here's this line. Liberty cannot be given, it must be taken. Where have you heard that before? This is from 1902, folks. People resisting the notion that they should have health care. Well, you can turn off the slide for a minute.
And this was really people looking at vaccinations and saying that they were wrong.
They were wrong. And so this leads us to, actually, now I'm already in the 1900s, but in 1905, we had the Supreme Court of the United States. Yes, the Supreme Court. Have you heard those guys lately? But it turns out they're important people. The Supreme Court of the United States ruled that the public good would overrule a person who did not want to get a vaccine. This is in 1905, because they made the point that the safety of the public supplants an individual freedom when it's the public health. Well, that didn't crush the anti-vaccination movement, but they kept it up for a bit. But ultimately, the Supreme Court reiterated it in 1922 that you cannot send your kid to school if they don't have a vaccine. Now, right now, at the end of the show, I'm going to tell you, you should get your vaccine as soon as you can get it. And take whatever one we're going to get because of the way things are going. But at the end of the day, the power of the Supreme Court and the government is to give us a vaccine. And there's a reason. If we don't all get vaccinated, this isn't going to work out. So then we are at not the beginning of the end, but this is the beginning of something different. So you have to have, one of your questions, but herd immunity here. And we all have to decide that it's worth it for the group. Yes, there's a lot of people who don't get that sick with it. You know, most people who have COVID, probably 50% plus, don't have a symptom. That's why this temperature check is not really that relevant. I was temperature check coming here, and we temperature check everyone coming to the endoscopy center. We're extremely safe, by the way. But it is an incredibly infectious disorder that has a low death rate. It's not as bad as smallpox, which was 60 or 70%, or Ebola, which would be 80 or 90%. And that's really one reason why it spreads so easy, because most people don't die of this. So it turns out actual standard hygiene, the hygiene that was standard, that was first introduced by Semmelweis and insisted on by Pasteur, is incredibly important. Now, still, and you not only have hygiene, you'll have antiseptics. That's where Lister comes in back in those days. This is a lot of old names, pasteurization, Listerine. This is so cool how this is sort of marketed for years, and they'd sell it on his name. But we have to pull together still. We're not out of this one. And we definitely have to move on with it. The original 1905 ruling from the Supreme Court came down all the way in to the validation that in the COVID pandemic, this is now, that face masks could be mandatory. And so the current president has mandated that face masks are on federal property. And personally, I think face masks should be mandated on every property. We had the opportunity where we found that our city council was going to potentially drop that. And a lot of us, including most of the doctors I knew, wrote notes. And I wrote notes about how I think we should wear a face mask. But there's a lot of fear of flying here, too. I think if you are careful and you wash your hands and you wear your face mask, and it doesn't have to be an N95. I'm out dressed up tonight, so I have a non-N95. But you should be careful, but you should go on about the business of living. We have been watching YouTube and Netflix too long, but you have to still have proximity things. You have to have some constant personal vigil. Notice that we're several feet apart.
We came in with masks on and we took them off right before we started.
Yeah. So the other thing that the Jacobson versus Massachusetts 1905 Supreme Court ruling was invoked with currently was the stay-at-home order. So it is actually, that stay-at-home order has Supreme Court precedence.
So kind of what you're saying is a lot of nothing's really new. I mean, these things.
It goes around. The problem is that if history repeats itself, and if you don't read history, it will repeat itself. And we've had a problem here. You have to not keep reinventing the same process. All right. So anyway, I want to keep moving because I want to get to our current vaccines. But our current vaccines are predicated on fear of flying from the last pandemic. Well, one reason I don't mind working, being in practice so long, besides that I don't know how to golf, is that I've always wanted to see a pandemic in my lifetime. Not really. However, I remember studying it, and I remember taking care of patients who had actually been in the pandemic of 1918, 1919, 1920. And I remember hearing about it. And by the way, those patients who got that pandemic, later on, lots of them did get Parkinson's and other disorders. There were latent issues, just like there will be in this pandemic. But in 1918-19, we have this pandemic. It's an influenza pandemic. And I remember thinking they shouldn't dig up those bodies and find out what that is, because that was a really bad thing. But luckily, I wasn't right, and that we actually did study and get enough technology to wrestle with it. And that's one reason why I'm talking about this tonight. Because things changed from 1918-19. And actually, in 1946, the first vaccines for influenza were made, and they were made for United States soldiers. The United States sponsored those because in the 1918-19 pandemic, 1 out of every 67 soldiers died. This is a lot of people. It wasn't just civilians. And of course, it was felt that it started in some place in Kansas, etc., or was it the Spanish flu, or where? Maybe it was from Wuhan. I have no idea. But it became a pandemic, and a lot of people died. So the idea of controlling it was important. And in 1945, this guy named Jonas Salk was working on this project with influenza. Well, that just jumps me forward to my childhood.
Okay. Polio.
Polio, yes. And I'm so glad I missed that. But as recently as a week or 10 days ago, I had a patient who had polio. And he survived it, but he still limps. We have people in the United States Senate who have had polio today. This was a big deal in the 50s. And vaccines changed that. And so the beauty of that is it took a long time to come up with a safe vaccine. We had the live vaccine, and they had vaccine Sundays, and people had to go over to get the vaccine, the shot, or finally, thank goodness, the sugar pills. But it changed the character of the polio. And when you have, later on, you have people get resistant to the notion that they should take something. But in general, it was incredibly useful and incredibly nice to be able to control these diseases. Well, now, we're going to jump ahead. I'm going to jump ahead to really quite a remarkable group, which is the 2015-2016. And thank God for billionaires. Because Bill Gates helped start CEPI, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness. And this has funded vaccinations for pandemics. They have actually funded our vaccine program. They're the ones who have helped fund the Moderna program. They have funded lots of that, but that became as an outgrowth of what? It became as an outgrowth of Ebola virus. Now, I remember thinking, and I even mentioned it on a show here some years ago, I didn't think it was a good idea to bring those people with Ebola here. But in reality, it worked out. And it didn't spread because it had a death rate of 65%. And so its ability to spread was limited. Now, this one doesn't have a death rate of 65%. It can spread. And it's good because we only had Ebola was self-limited. Then we got the first SARS. And then we got something called MERS, camels. But at the end of the day, those brought us technologies which CEPI and a lot of other scientists have done. So after the break, I'm going to bring us to the current vaccine. Is that all right?
That's great. And once again, we're going to take a short break, and we encourage you to call in any questions you might have. We'll be coming back. It'll be around 8:30 or so. But once again, we encourage you to call. That number's on the screen, area code 850-432-7768. And when we come back, we're going to be talking about some of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, and maybe how they differ from some of the regular vaccines you may when you get a flu shot. So stay with us. We'll be right back with Health Talk.
Is
It's impossible to replace anybody that you loved. She was my great role model, my Grandma Keaton. It was pretty much of a shock for us when she got colon cancer. None of us were prepared for that. Here's the deal, and this is the bottom line here. Colorectal cancer is the second leading cancer killer of men and women over the age of 50. And you know what? This is one that you can prevent. Just get screened, okay? I know how precious life is right now. We can all do this. You can do it, I can do it. If I can do it, you can do it, okay? How's that for a deal?
Our weight, it's with us every day. It's not that we don't try to say goodbye to our excess weight. We do. We exercise, we eat healthier, we try to stay active. But for many of us, it's simply not enough. Well, there's finally a solution. Introducing Orbera, a non-surgical procedure to achieve meaningful long-term weight loss. Orbera is a new non-surgical weight loss procedure that can help you gain the edge and lose the weight. People lost more than 3 times the weight with Orbera than diet and exercise alone. Orbera gives you that edge you need to lose the weight and power a more confident, healthier lifestyle. Orbera is not for those who are pregnant or breastfeeding, have autoimmune or organ disease. Heartburn, stomach discomfort, abdominal pain, and bowel obstruction are rare. Other adverse events include nausea and vomiting. Find out more and see if Orbera is right for you.
Welcome back to Health Talk. Guest tonight is Dr. Roger Orth. He's a board-certified gastroenterologist with Gastroenterology Associates. And we have a call. Let's go to it. Hi, welcome to Health Talk. Do you have a question for Dr. Orth?
Yes, I do. I'm really enjoying the show so far. I just have a quick question. Is it safe to get a COVID-19 vaccine if you're pregnant or breastfeeding? I haven't heard too much about this and just wanted to know what you think, Dr. Orth.
Well,
I'll hang up now so I can listen to the answer.
okay.
All right, thank you.
You know, when they did the studies, they purposely excluded pregnant people, but it turned out that some people got pregnant. So, yes, I think that would be a big yes. In fact, my life has changed because of COVID in many ways. Not only am I home more, but my children came home. My pregnant daughter came here from Seattle to sequester before she had her baby, and now she's here. That's little Robin, for those who remember her. And guess what? My son came home, and he brought his wife, who's Dr. Orth, Dr. Ashley Orth, who is a endodontist, and guess what? We found out she's pregnant. So we had a chat about it, but endodontists are very high risk, and so she had her COVID shot. So if it's good enough for my daughter-in-law, it's darn well good enough for anybody as far as I'm concerned. And in a high-risk situation, and right now we're in an incredible risk situation, in this town and all over the country. Yes, as soon as we get a shot option, unless you have a very specific kind of issue that it's pretty unpredictable, but the kind of vaccine that they're making that we have access to right now is such a molecular miracle that it has very little risk. It's more of a risk of problems to do with the nanoparticle, and I'm going to talk about nanoparticles in a moment.
So we've got now Pfizer and Moderna, and you know, shots are being done. We've got Johnson & Johnson coming up and some other companies. What is it about the vaccine made by these 2 companies that is different from the vaccine that you get for your yearly flu shot?
Well, there's never been one made like that.
Yeah.
That's what's amazing. And if you look at it, that starting in the time frame of 2016 when Gates founded CEPI, but we have such incredibly good technologies available to change and radically change the delivery of a protein. And so this is what an mRNA vaccine is about. But I did want to at least read to you something that was written by Bill Gates in 2016. He says, if anything kills over 10 million people in the next few decades, it most likely to be a highly infectious virus rather than a war. We have invested a huge amount in nuclear deterrence, We've actually invested very little in a system to stop an epidemic. We are not ready. It turns out these guys, as well as many great scientists, have been working on this reason why we could have a vaccine. When February came around last year and this was becoming an issue, everyone, even the NIH and the CDC and all of the best scientists said, we probably won't have a vaccine for a year and a half, maybe 3. And you actually had a vaccine in 10 or 11 months. How did that work? Why is that? How did that happen? And I think the science of this is just marvelous. It is such advancement. And so I'm going to take a second to talk about mRNA vaccines. How do they work? mRNA as a compound was only described for the first time in 1962-63. So when we went to school, we had DNA, RNA, but they're not mRNA. But that's when it was started. People knew about it for the first time. mRNA is the little thing that transports the signal. But mRNA turns out to be really very important because it's telling the body what to do. mRNA is in its own special way in the body. It's the software of life. It's a memory stick. It sends the signal from a stationary thing, which is DNA, says what to make, and then sends it over to the protein and it tells it make it. It's a memory stick. And so if you can control the mRNA, you can tell the body to make its own protein. Protein metabolism, which started much of it in the University of California, San Diego, when I was there, much of that, hybridomas, monoclonals, all of that started there. And so it was a way to deliver a protein as a therapeutic instrument. And you could make it, you could use splice technologies from DNA, make a protein and look good, and you could inject it. This is so much more sophisticated because the mRNA is put into a cell in a very special package. And it goes into the cell, and it doesn't take over the whole cell. It just goes to the ribosome, which makes protein. And when it makes the protein, it makes whatever the message is. This is amazing because you can make the body make a protein inside the cell and then find a way to use that. So this platform, it wasn't always going to be there. When it first started out, the mRNA studies, the lady who started it, whose name is Carico, she was over there in Pennsylvania, but they didn't think it would be very useful. But she described something that was really very important subsequently, that you could make pseudo nucleosides. Now, you think, well, DNA has some nucleosides and RNA has certain kinds of nucleosides. But by making a pseudo, it made it immune, it made it invisible. So the body would not destroy it. This was revolutionary. And by the way, that was patented. And that's what allowed these other technologies to evolve with this platform. So they ended up being able to control the signal, the software. It is amazing. And so from there, we ended up having this platform where you could send an mRNA, but you had to figure out, how am I going to get it in there? Well, that's where, again, great scientists occur. Some of them are incredibly entrepreneurial. But a guy named Robert Langer at MIT figured out that he could get it in there with a nanoparticle. Don't you love the word nanoparticle? My father always liked that type of thing, nano. But he made a very special compound that would go, he knew enough about cell layers to make something that would invisibly drift into the cell. And it would go into the cell and then go into the cytoplasm. The mRNA does not go into the nucleus. It's going nowhere near the nucleus. It's not going to change your DNA. And you're not going to learn to play violin or speak Chinese because you get this shot. It's going to go in there, and it's going to make a protein right where you want it to make a protein. What protein is it going to make? It's going to make the spike protein. This is really the most interesting part because of all of this research on the MERS and the SARS, the spike protein is not some Chinese made-up deal. This is the protein that is the actual receptor binder that goes to our own bodies. Everybody has these cells, and it has this little thing sticking out. And it grabs onto that thing, and then it finds its way in. Well, one of the more interesting features of this, at least for these two vaccines, is that Andrew Ward and his team out in La Jolla, and working with the teams from Texas and the teams from the NIH, they figured out using a new kind of science for electron microscopy called cryo-electron microscopy. Wow, that's a cool one too. And they could freeze it. And if they freeze it, they can see what the figure is, what the contortion is. Now, I was thinking I might show you some pictures of viruses, but really, they're not, it looks too complicated. But when they freeze it, they can tell you the shape. This virus, when it works, it's like a plunger. It's giving a shot of itself into your cell through that receptor. So if you want to stop that plunger, you have to stop it when it's in the up position. So the pre-injection position. Ward and his team, using the cryo, freeze-froze it, figured out the shape of it, and then figured out you could make that same shape using, if you know what the configuration is, and everyone knew what it was when they know the DNA that came from China. You make a special substitute, a couple of nucleotides, peptides. In this case, it was proline and proline. But they make it so it would bend a certain way and stay out in the out position. And this is what allows the spike protein to allow it to be actually immobilized so that you could end up freezing it and then having it in that position, because that's the position you want to get it when you have an antibody.
Let's take a quick call here. Hi, welcome to Health Talk. Do you have a question for Dr. Orth?
Yes, I do. I've gotten my first shot of the Moderna vaccine, and I'm scheduled to get my second shot on February 16th. I guess I have a three-part to my question. First of all, do I have any protection at this point between the first shot and the second shot? Secondly, how long does it take for the vaccine to kick in and work? And then finally, how long will it last? I'm going to hang up so that I can hear and listen.
Okay.
Okay. Well, let's just go over that, because this is the
Thanks for your questions.
this is the crux of the matter. When you get this shot, the first shot will give you some immunity, and it might be 40 to 50, 60% immunity. But it's not, you've got to understand, this immunity is not protective of you from having the virus. It's protecting you from not dying, from not getting sick. These are neutralizing antibodies. And so the real issue is that they haven't really got the studies straight yet, that you can have a totally protective, but also that it's curative. This isn't necessarily curative. You see this? This is a mask. Get used to it. Get used to it. This is a protective system. It's not curative. We'll be having boosters, and we will be getting additional other kinds of viruses to get through this mishmash. Now, when you get it, you'll end up being, within another 4 or 6 weeks, you'll probably be protected to the point where you won't be one of the people in the hospital. And I will tell you how my shots went, because yes, I've had not one, but 2. Thank you. I was very happy to get those. But I am a working doctor, so to speak, and I do see up close a lot of people in different ways. But I think everyone should get this vaccine. And you will be pretty much protected, but that doesn't mean you're out of the situation. And we aren't going to get out of this situation if we don't have high compliance rate. you really have to have, for the herd immunity, you really have to have some component of somewhere, because of the way this is working, probably 80 or 90% of people having either had the disease or having the vaccine. How long it will work, they don't know yet. That's why I can guarantee you the studies that I've been reading, and I got nothing to do except watch Netflix and read about vaccines. And so nobody knows this, because this is real time. This is like a bad movie. In fact, they will make movies out of what's been going on this year. I'm sure that Netflix is working on that.
Well, we're going to take a short break and come right back with Health Talk. We've got a line holding, and Dr. Orth will continue talking about what he was discussing. And we're going to talk a little bit more about his personal getting the shot, what it was like, and really how he feels as far as the protection he has. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Our weight, it's with us every day. It's not that we don't try to say goodbye to our excess weight. We do. We exercise, we eat healthier, we try to stay active. But for many of us, it's simply not enough. Well, there's finally a solution. Introducing Orbera, a non-surgical procedure to achieve meaningful long-term weight loss. Orbera is a new non-surgical weight loss procedure that can help you gain the edge and lose the weight. People lost more than 3 times the weight with Orbera than diet and exercise alone. Orbera gives you that edge you need to lose the weight and power a more confident, healthier lifestyle. Orbera is not for those who are pregnant or breastfeeding, have autoimmune or organ disease. Heartburn, stomach discomfort, abdominal pain, and bowel obstruction are rare. Other adverse events include nausea and vomiting. Find out more and see if Orbera is right for you.
El cine nos entretiene, pero esto no es la vida real. Lo que sí es real es que el cáncer colorectal es la segunda causa de muerte por cáncer entre hombres y mujeres. Los pólipos que lo causan pueden detectarse y eliminarse antes de que se convierten en cáncer. Pero tú lo puedes prevenir. Hágase un examen para detectar el cáncer colorectal. Yo lo hice. Podría salvar su vida.
Si usted es mayor de 50 años, hágase el examen de detección.
Welcome back to Health Talk. My guest tonight is Dr. Roger Orth. He's a board-certified gastroenterologist, and we've got some calls. Hi, welcome to the show. Do you have a question?
I do.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
So my question is, if this vaccine is so wonderful, why are so many people, including healthcare professionals, choosing not to get it?
Ignorance. The reality is that we've had a lot of misinformation, and we have had it. That's really why I showed those other slides. But we've had misinformation about lots of things for some time, and if you look into Wikipedia under misinformation for the COVID vaccine, they have this neologism called infodemic. And then they give this like incredible list of misinformation that's been out there for this particular pandemic. But this isn't unique for this pandemic. This was going on with rabies. It was going on with smallpox. It was going on. We're not uniquely ignorant currently. But as far as I can tell, if you look at your statistics, in this country, you have a 1 in 973 chance of dying from COVID, or you can take an incredibly low-risk vaccine. Have your choice.
Hi, welcome to the show. Do you have a question?
Yes. For our community to get back to business, we need to get to herd immunity. I'm not sure what percentage of immunization that is, but what does Dr. Orth think we can do as business owners to try to get our employees to like buck up and take the vaccine? Because in my company, it seems like half the people are saying, "Oh, I don't want to do that."
You know, that's really one reason I'm doing this talk. I'm not a vaccinologist. I'm an interested reader. I'm an observer. I never thought I'd be living through a pandemic, and I'm very happy to get that vaccine. I'm thrilled my mother's getting one. She's 94. You guys remember she was on TV here a couple of years ago. Good luck, Mom. But I think you have to realize that if they don't get that, this is going to drag this entire process out. And then what you're going to end up with is not just a change in administration, a change in lifestyle. And we can move ahead. Now, if you take the current number of vaccines as of today that have been given in the world, where is that number? I counted them up. As of today, there's been 71.6 million doses. I'm sorry, there's a lot of people in this world. I told you earlier there was too many. However, it's not due to the current administration, the fact that this science is going to allow them to have unbelievable number of billion shots within the year. It's because of the science behind it. Warp Speed was an incredibly good program. It's the delivery and the mechanism and the bad talking about it and not realizing that you actually had a winner here. But the reality is that if you have it properly managed, it can scale up. That's the beauty of mRNA vaccines alone. It's faster and it allows it to scale up quicker. They're using standard technology. They actually make the mRNA into DNA. They make a plasmid and they run it through E. coli or etc. And they can generate large amounts of mRNA and then get rid of the DNA with the DNase, and then you will have a pure product. They can do it in vats. It's kind of, in a way, it's just like Louis Pasteur and fermentation and saving the wine industry back in France. They're saving our industry by making vats of mRNA. And it can be done on large scale and short notice. And in addition, it's very important to notice that it's very flexible. This vaccine, they've already made an analog for the South African variant, which is more virulent, which is worse news. So they can make a variant so that it can buckle up and be a booster for their current vaccine, at least Moderna has. We can respond to this as they scale up these procedures. And if you just wash your hands, have some distance, and be patient, we can have a pretty good economy and stop shutting the economy down and stop making it so that it's worse than it is. It can be solved now.
All right,
it is being solved.
Does that help you with your answer, sir?
Very, very interesting show. Thanks for doing it.
All right, thank you, sir. Welcome to the show. Do you have a question for Dr. Orth?
Yes, I do. I'm concerned about the vaccine only because it was created and put on the market so quickly. And I just wonder if I'm going to really be protected when I take it. I'm 74 years old, and I am very concerned about getting the COVID.
Yes, and you know, this is exactly why I'm here.
Thank you, ma'am.
It's the way they did this. The way they did this science. They actually, when you look at how they made this, they made the actual vaccine mechanism in 7 weeks. And they had it being produced in 2 months because it was all set up. It's like when you have mRNA technology, it's very complex, but when you have mRNA technology, you can actually reach in and change it around and make a different thing on short notice. And that's the beauty of it.
Heidi, do you have a question for Dr. Orth?
Yes, sir. My question is it okay to get the vaccine if you're going to have an invasive procedure or if you have recently had an invasive procedure, for example, a heart cath or a stent?
All right.
Heart stent.
All right,
Well,
thank you, ma'am.
It's interesting because 100% of the invasive procedures are pre-screened because we screen them also. But if you're in a hospital and getting one of those procedures, you're actually getting tested if you have COVID already because they don't want to do it if you've got COVID. So the answer is yes, you would take that.
All right, getting down to about 2 minutes here, Dr. Orth, and wanted to talk about why you took the vaccine yourself and, you know, any side effects with you. You know, why are people so pushed back on this thing, just like that gentleman that called said. How do we get people to believe in it?
I think we have to talk about it. And I think your doctor should look at it, but I will tell you, I was in a room today. I had 4 people with me. And of those, 2 are younger. One's a nurse, one is a tech, one is a nurse anesthetist, and one is myself. So, myself, I've had both vaccines, both shots. And so, yes, my arm hurt. My daughter-in-law, she had even a low-grade fever and felt miserable. I've had a number of partners, 1 or 2 were laid down for a day or so for the second shot because it's working. But nobody that I know of has gotten really sick. I think Dr. Hakim knew 1 person with adenopathy. Again, these are not huge issues compared to others. But I had 2 employees who are my employees who said, one of them says, I'm not really sure I want to ever get one. And the other one says, I said, why don't you watch the show? Okay. But you know, you have to work it through. Right now, everyone wants a vaccine, so if they don't want one, give it to the person who does want one. But pretty soon, we're going to all need one, or you're going to need a Supreme Court ruling again. And I can tell you, this Supreme Court's going to do the same thing they did in 1905. You need to take your shot. Take your shot. And if I'm coming towards the end, I'm going to go to...
Yeah, we're about 30 seconds out.
I'm going to go to the next slide.
Very last one.
Yeah, go to the next slide. No, go to the next one.
Next one.
Next one.
Next one.
There it is. So this is who's going to help us out here. Finally, we're going to listen to a doctor, a scientist. That's Tony Fauci. He's on a donut. You can have the bite of the donut, but take it to the bank. You can trust that we had real scientists running this show, and whether or not we had the real leaders is a different issue. But we had scientists.
Dr. Orth, thank you so much for being with us. And we just scratched the surface. And thank you for watching Health Talk, and we'll see you next time.